Hi, it's Shari Fleet-Mall here for the Awake Network and the Mindful Relationship Summit, co-sponsored by Shambhala Mountain Center. And really thrilled and excited to be here today with Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt. And they are both PhDs and therapists who've been involved in the world of relationship and conscious relationship and healthy relationships for a long time. So how are you all today? Welcome.
We are great. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to meet both of you, and just really looking forward to exploring your work a little bit and sharing your wisdom with our audience. We're here on the 5th day of the Mindful Relationship Summit, which is the subject of which is love as spiritual path, or we might also say relationship as spiritual path. And, you know, I'd really like to start off with the fact that you all have been married for over 30 years, and you have 6 children and 6 grandchildren. And you've also been working together and developing therapeutic models together and trainings together and written many books together. So, you know, you really are modeling this relationship thing. This isn't just something we thought up last week.
We work at it all the time.
That's great.
That's wonderful.
That's great. So I want to tell our audience just a little bit about you all and your work, and then we'll jump right into the conversation.
Okay.
So, Harville and Helen have written many books each, and they've also co-written a number of books, and in particular, 3 New York Times bestsellers: "Getting the Love You Want," "Keeping the Love You Find." Those go together quite nicely, and "Giving the Love That Heals." And their latest book, "Making Marriage Simple," came out in 2013. And they are the developers, the founders of the Imago therapy model, and I'm going to ask them a little bit about that, and also a model for conversations called Safe Conversations. They've been training therapists throughout the world through Imago Relationships International, and they've also developed a nonprofit called Relationships First in a nonprofit context to bring wisdom and useful skills out of the world of relationship. We all know that our human lives are really all about relationship, and we all need all the help we can get when it comes to that, in terms of whether it's our family relationships, our professional relationships, and so on. I'd like to just mention a couple other things. That Harville's work has been featured on Oprah 17 times, and Helen, who's the author of Faith and Feminism, was installed in the Women's Hall of Fame for her leadership in the women's global movement. So maybe I should start with you, Harville, and say what's it like to be 30 years with a strong feminist woman who's considered a leader of the global feminist movement?
Well, I have been inspired by Helen, and the inspiration first for what she has done with women and for women and girls, which is really phenomenal and also unique in the amount of resources she has brought to that movement. But the second thing is I've been inspired by the fact that as a feminist, she is also a movement builder and movement maker, that she has knows how and has created a number of organizations. They're called New York Women's Foundation, Dallas Women Foundation. And I think there are about 135 or so of those foundations around the world, in more like 30-something countries. So not only has she helped to raise the funds, but she's also spearheaded the movement and has inspired me to move sort of out of my provincial therapeutic models into a social consciousness and social action, which is now what we're doing together with regard to relationships. That's also global. So she's been a challenge and an inspiration and a guide for some of the most important things in my life.
And maybe I'll make one point and then we'll move on into more of the subject, which is even though I knew when we were dating, we'd both been divorced, and I asked Harville if he could wave a magic wand, what would he like to do with his life? And he told me about a book he wanted to write on why do couples fight? Why does the dream become a nightmare? And we kept going out on dates. I kept asking him about the book, and I finally proposed marriage to him because I thought this book could be so important in the culture. My work, and so I cared about the book. My work became women's work for another reason. And it was never about women per se. It was all about a healthy culture. That if we don't have both the masculine and the feminine energy in the culture, it's so incomplete to try to coalesce as a culture. We need both that yin and the yang guiding the culture as it moves forward, as well as in a household. You need that masculine and feminine energy in partnership, not the patriarchal energy, but the partnership energy. So that was always what motivated me around women's philanthropy and the global women's movement.
And then we've, as you noticed with the books, became co-authors, co-creators, and now co-presenters in the world of relationships in general, with a focus on couples. And we're now sort of, we got the couple thing down, and we're going to stay with that and then expand it in about a year or two into other relationships like schools and corporations and congregations. So it's been a journey of co-creating theory, co-creating structures, co-creating process, presenting. So we really are a couple, and we've grown and finally figured out how to dance without stepping on each other's toes most of the time.
Well, that's wonderful, and there's so many directions we could go, and we will come back to the theme. I just want to mention that, Shambhala and Shambhala and Shambhala Mountain Center, the primary focus is social transformation. So wonderful alignment here between your work and of course, we've made a lot of gains in this U.S. culture, and for the women's movement, feminism is a long way to go, obviously. And that issue of bringing the masculine and the feminine, especially the deep masculine, the deep feminine, into balance. But around the world, there's still, just the work of empowering women and empowering girls, particularly around the world, is so critical at the global level. So I just really want to commend you for your life purpose and the work.
Thank you.
So the theme for today in the Mindful Relationship Summit is love as a spiritual path. And obviously you all have been together for a long time, and your work is focused on supporting people in relationship, and particularly couples. So maybe we could just start there. What does that theme mean to the two of you, of actually taking love and relationship as a spiritual path?
So you want me to start with that?
Whatever you want.
Well, let me start with that by stating that we think that there's an integral relationship between what we do and spirituality, and the link is rooted in our fundamental assumption. We make an assumption that the universe has a certain feature to it, and we call it connecting. That it is what the universe is. It is connecting. Everything is connecting to everything, everywhere, all the time. And since we are a thread in the tapestry of the universe, we are also doing what the universe is doing. So connecting is our nature. And that connecting is something we can feel, we can experience. And when we do, we feel fully alive, and we feel joyful, and there's a sense of wonder. And you cannot not connect, because that's what reality is connecting, but you can lose awareness of it. And the awareness is lost when we become anxious, when there's negativity or rupture in the interactive space with another human being. And when you lose that, then you go into what we call ordinary but common and universal experience. So moving from a technicolor world to a world that's black and white, moving from a world where you feel in the flow of being to a world where you are then struggling to find a purpose, to find meaning, to look for hope, that all those common universal human struggles are essentially trying to recover our connection to being, to what is, and we call what is connecting. So I think that's what we call the ontological ground of imago theory. And then our psychology about relationships is built on that. And we have thought a lot about spirituality, and Helen has some very insightful things to say about that. So why don't you pick up on that theme?
I will start with when Harville and I were dating, and I had, he mentioned this book he wanted to write, and as I would ask him each time to tell me more about the book because it seemed so interesting. And what I began to see in the book, which I shared with Harville, is he reminded me of Martin Buber. And he went, really? What is this like Martin Buber? And to me, that idea in his Martin Buber, the Jewish mystic, his book, The I, Thou, that most of us go through life, I'm the I. I don't know why it is we all feel like we're the center of the universe. We're wired, to self-protect and, prevent ourselves from predators gobbling us up. So we have to think about ourselves first. And Buber pointed out that we think the I is so important and people in our lives are it's. They're here to serve our needs. And we objectify people. That's not his word, but people are it's. But Buber says if we ever shift from treating someone like from an I, it to an I, thou, and if two people begin to see each other as serving each other, Buber says the universal energies of love begin to flow through the two people and into the space between. And these universal energies of love he refers to as God, that God takes residence in the space between. So that was a wow for me. Harville was languaging this stuff, and to me, I early on saw the God stuff. That's not Harville's favorite language in the past, right? I mean, you talked about God early on, but then weren't using that spiritual language for a while. But
well, yeah, I think my struggle with language has been more denominational.
Yeah.
I grew up in a Southern Baptist environment and became a Southern Baptist minister. And when I finally, and that was before I went to seminary and got my theology degree from Union Theological Seminary in New York. Before then, I didn't know till I got there that the theology of Southern Baptist in South Georgia was not in the Bible. When I finally got into the Bible.
Don't smoke, don't drink. What's for the scripture about that?
It was so
we're the best.
Yeah.
All the others are wrong.
Right.
That's not really in the scripture.
And that there was all the rules, but also the literalisms of it and the objectification features and the badness of human beings and so forth. When I got into the New Testament in graduate school and also learned Greek and began to read it in Greek, I realized that the South and Southern Baptist and most denominations don't really teach Christianity. They teach Christianity, but they don't teach Jesus, and they don't teach because Jesus is very simple. So it's like, love your neighbor as you love yourself. This is very simple. So I moved toward a more a non-denominational language, and I think what I say now is that it's a linguistic preference. If you take connecting as being, you want to use the theological language, you can say, God is being and God is connecting, and that relationship is God is relating. So those are philosophical linguistic preferences or theological linguistic preferences. But the ground of what we do is inherently spiritual in the classic sense, that most spiritual traditions that I'm familiar with posit some sense of unity as the nature of being, as the nature of reality, or a oneness, and that's accessed through non-dual consciousness and so forth. So if we want to just take off one set of words and move into another linguistic preference, we could talk with a Hindu, with a Buddhist, with mystical Christians, people like Richard Rohr, who we've been actually reading recently, where he talks about the cosmic Christ. It's like, and that, the Big Bang was God incarnating God's self into the world. So therefore the world is the incarnation of God. It's like, I can really resonate with that kind of language. I still don't know what any of it means. But but there's a linguistic accessibility and a linguistic resonance for me in that, is that it's not anything you can confine to language or put in a concept. Paul Tillich was my theological mentor, and he said, hey, the best we can do is create symbols that point to that which you can never see or be or touch, but the symbolic. So his was only symbolic access. I think Tillich was not quite right about that. I think there is an experiential piece that the symbols point to that you can actually have, that it's not purely symbolic, that there is an experiential level. I just think Tillich never had a spiritual experience, but he had an amazing theology that saved me from my Southern Baptist heritage.
A last comment is that in addition to all Harville has just said, the basis of most of the world's greatest religions is compassion or love. I mean, that's the apex of practicing that faith. And those are relational terms that we at our best, our human potential is learning to be compassionate and loving. And for us, then, relationship is a spiritual path. And especially couplehood, your main person you're related to, because that's the one you want to kill more often than other people. Like you're just really tired of the jerk you're living with. Like you just had it. And practicing loving compassion with that person is the ultimate test of your spiritual strength.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's many writings in the Buddhist tradition, as well as in other contemplative traditions, that point to, you know, any notion of enlightenment or liberation, that it's the only place you can really see it and say, okay, that's, you know, point to that's some quality of enlightenment or that's some quality of liberation, is in the relational field. That's where it actually shows up in the way in which we relate with each other. Let me frame the conversation a little more. You know, in terms of spiritual path, in terms of spirituality to begin with, you know, we may have a sense at any point in our life of our overall level of sort of spiritual well-being. And for a lot of us, that has to do with a sense of being, of connectedness within ourselves, with others, with some greater dimension, a sense of meaning and purpose in life and these things. And then we also have this idea of being on a path, perhaps. In some sense that we're growing, we're evolving, we're deepening. And so maybe in that context, could you talk about that field of relationship as a place where two people who, you know, our paths never quite line up all the time, but that two people could have that sense of both evolving on their spiritual path, where the relationship is a primary vehicle, at least one of the vehicles or containers for that journey.
That's indigenous to our system and to our thinking. We start off with the human problematic is ruptured connection, ruptured connecting, and that's universal, and that it happens probably for most of us in the caretaker-child relationship, and that the consequence of the rupture of connecting is the loss of the experience of being, and its replacement by an enormous self-preoccupation caused by anxiety. So it's when you lose awareness of being, you flip into the mode of the terror of non-being, which is a kind of something I'm borrowing from Paul Tillich, that we don't only worry about being hurt when we're anxious. Anxiety is not about just being hurt or dying, but it's about disappearing from the whole of being. So non-being is an ever-present threat. So we posit that there's a mental condition called emotional symbiosis, which basically means I lose my awareness of the otherness of the other, and I make the other up in my own, out of my own inner materials, project that identity, the fantasized other, onto the real other, and then relate to the fantasized other, but the real other objects to that overlay because it's not them. and they know they're not being seen. And so that the journey of a couple, and this is true of all couples, this just came out of the clinic, that the journey that couples have is, first of all, their conflict is because neither one of them is willing to accept the projected other. You know, I'm not that. You know, I don't like chocolate ice cream. No, that's not what I said. You know, why don't you turn left? You know, if you only, so we're always objecting to the otherness of the other because they're not like the fantasized other. So that the goal of couples is to peel off, become aware of and peel off this fictional self that we project onto the other so that we can experience the other. And it seems to me that that's the other Jesus was talking about when he said, love your neighbor. He was not saying, love the neighbor you made up in your mind. He's saying, love the neighbor. And that's what he talked about, you know, you love your enemy, because usually the person you're married to is your enemy because they won't be like the fictional self that you created. So that the journey that's both spiritual and the journey that's relational is the journey to differentiation, to differentiating me from you so that I can clearly see the you beyond the fictional self that I created. And then that's the you that I accept. That's the you that I acknowledge. That's the you that I then love, like Jesus said. And we have a thing we call it the ladder to love, which starts with acknowledging your otherness and accepting your otherness, and then appreciating it, adding some value to it, and then admiring it because it is new. In other words, it's a journey of discovery, that the more that I pay attention to the you-ness that's emerging out of the fog of my projections, I get curious. And after a while, I'm admiring it and I'm advocating it, and I finally get to adoration. Then I'm into a space that is truly beyond conflict, because you can't have conflict usually with the reality of another self. You only have conflict when they won't conform to the self that you projected onto them. Oh, and Helen wants to say something.
Just another journey is one that Harville had languaged when I met him, which was, how many years ago was that?
About 40 now.
About 40 years ago, I met him, we met each other, and we've never said that word.
What?
40, that we've known each other 40 years.
Well, we just
And
became 40.
and so I've been a really good dialogue partner and been a contributor to some of the theory, but when I had met him, he was talking about 3 stages of love. That there is the romantic phase, but there's the power struggle, and that is phase 2, and every couple goes into the power struggle. Beyond phase 2 is phase 3. Good luck. Real love. You can get there if you know how to go through the power struggle. Well, I thought that was awesome. And we have the technology to give couples to help them through that power struggle. So that's what our work is. But we have to let people know it's a myth in the culture that if you're struggling in your relationship, maybe you're married to the wrong person. One of our koans to meditate on is incompatibility is the grounds for marriage, or intimate partnership. But I think my last comment right now is just to say, we know he was talking about the power struggle and getting stuck in it. I just do want to take this moment to say, we know the power struggle very well, because the way you all described us, any viewer might think that we had always had a happy relationship, when in fact, we were so stuck in the power struggle in our marriage, like 10 years after we married, that when I dragged him to therapy, so he would wake up and start practicing some spiritual skills, so he'd be nice to me or whatever.
Or practice the imago, the theory we developed.
Yeah, I kept holding up the book and went, you wrote this.
Right.
Don't forget.
It's like, do what you know.
Your own book, right?
I dragged him to therapy, and we fired that therapist because they weren't as smart as we are. So dragged him to a second therapist. We fired that therapist. But anyway, the 5th therapist called us the couple from hell and fired us. So we know if anyone has ever struggled, we just want people to know there now is a science that can help a couple in bad a shape as we were in, we now have the marriage of our dreams. So there is help out there. It's in the clinic. Harville's vision. Let's get it into the public towards social transformation.
Well, that's certainly good news. And I want to bring this back to maybe a little bit of a practical question. So, you frame this by talking about there's this rupture in the connectedness that we all experience. It's probably the human condition. I don't think any of us can escape it. And, that's a lifetime just working through that and rediscovering that innate or unconditional connectedness within us. And then you have two people trying to do that together. And of course, you talked about the really deep work in relationship of withdrawing projections and meeting the real other, and then those steps. So this is all deep work, and clearly skilled therapists can be very helpful. But for the couples or the people aspiring to be in a relationship that are watching us right now, maybe what are some of course it's always great if you're a couple go to a couples workshop, read some books, and at some point you may or may not need therapy. I don't know why it seems like it's always the female in the couple dragging the male into the couple, although of course we have that just describes male-female relationships, but and also I can't imagine the two of you, a therapist taking on two skilled therapists as clients would be pretty tough. What are some things and practices and principles that we can begin to employ in our relationships, maybe before we need to get in therapy? Not that therapy wouldn't always be a good thing.
Yeah, well, we have worked on that we can't just stay at this theoretical level. In fact, that's what's made Imago distributable around the world in the 37 countries. So we focus on conversation, and we call it safe conversation. Or another way we have branded it is dialogue. In fact, dialogue is sort of the core brand, and it's a structured conversation. It starts with mirroring, and you go to validation, and you go to empathy. And it's exactly what you said, is that when we finally got clear that that dialogue, the power of dialogue, that it's self-transformative. Most of the fluff around therapy fell off for us about how long to spend exploring childhood, how long to spend exploring the things that were wrong, and in fact began to move pretty much out of that. Even moved out of let's explore your potential, let's look at all kinds of things about your life, to simply engaging in a conversation. And if you stay in this conversation called mirroring, called dialogue, and I send you a message, and you say to me, well, I don't, and you say to me, well, I don't agree. Instead of doing that, if you say, let me see if I got that, and you practice reflecting that with accuracy, and you become interested in that and enough to say, did I get it? And the person says, well, not quite. So, well, tell me what I missed. And they say, well, what I missed. You say, oh, let me mirror it again. Then you say, did I get it? They say, well, yeah, you got it now. And then you go to curiosity. Well, is there more about it? That, in other words, the showing of interest. What happens with the structure of the conversation is anxiety begins to go down. And that allows the projection to be released, because this person is now telling you their real inner world, and you're saying, let me see if I got that. Did I get that? Is there more about that? And then you get to some point and you say, well, gosh, let me see if I'm getting all of this. Did I get it all? And well, if I got it all, you make sense. I can see, and what we basically mean is I don't have to agree with you that it's green or yellow or hot or cold in here, or if something about a political statement. I don't have to agree with you, but I have to see that is you, and I have to leave that alone, not judge it, not ask you not to have the world you just disclosed to me. So I let that in. And what we know is that if I let in, without judgment, your reality into my consciousness, I change. In fact, if I let it in, I change with every sentence, because my whole interior world is being reorganized by new data. But most of the time we are waiting to, protect our world and go back and say, well, I hear what you're saying, but this is the real world. Then we're not letting anything in, and the conversation doesn't produce any changes. So there has to be reception of what's coming in. And when you do, you change. And then if you do that mutually, the sending partner changes because you switch the dialogue and say, let me now tell you about the world I live in. And they hold that without judgment and criticism or devaluation. Then they grow. And so that conversational process. So what we discovered is we can take that structured conversation out of the clinic. It doesn't need the money or the regularity of time. It needs to be taught as a relationship education process to the general public. So we took it out of the clinic as Imago Dialogue and changed it for public consumption into safe conversation, and located it in a new not-for-profit called Relationships First. And we've now delivered that to 131 countries through the streaming process and about 500,000 people, helping them simply talk. We say talking is the most dangerous thing in the world you can do. Listening is the most infrequent thing you can do. But if you can talk without judgment and listen without criticizing, you can then connect through your differences. And when you do that, you're in what we call the flow of being. And that's where joy is. That's where you feel fully alive. To us, spiritually, that's the ultimate spirituality, is the flow of being. But you can't be in that if you're judging anybody, because that pulls you out into a dual consciousness. It's me and you, and I'm good and you're bad. But if you can move into that flow, and that can be done by anybody before therapy, during therapy, after therapy. In fact, we started this project in order to make what we think is the engine of therapy available to the masses without having to go to therapy. Now, sometimes somebody has enough disturbance from their childhood or enough abuse in life that they can't just get it as an educational process, so they need therapy. And so we say, hey, we got a network of therapists around the world, go to them. There are all the other therapists also you can go to. But if you will talk without judging, listen without criticizing, and hold difference with reverence, you can probably move into the solution of the problem you were going to take to therapy.
Is this model, and this sounds so incredibly valuable, not only for couples, but for all of us in life. Our political leaders could learn to use these skills.
Yes, wouldn't it work?
Wonderful. So is this Safe Conversations method available on your website or in a book?
Yeah, if you go to relationshipsfirst.org, relationshipsfirst.org, in fact, is the website up, or it will be up we have a new one that's going to be up, relationshipsfirst.org. And we also have a book coming out this month, I think, called The Space Between. That's the new arena that we work in, that life is lived in the space between, not inside. It's lived in the space between, which you internalize. So your inner world is the internalization of the quality of the interactive world. And we wrote a whole book on that called The Space Between, and that'll be on Amazon, I think in a couple of weeks. I don't have the dates on that, but very soon, both of those will be up.
That's wonderful, because I think so many couples so many relationships get into trouble because we simply don't have the skills or a structured way of safely communicating with each other. And I'm curious, I've been part of some similar methods, and some we call the consult process and other kind of dialogue processes, and couples work and so forth. And in some of these schools, we sometimes talk about, if you're willing to do this practice on a regular basis with each other, really set aside structured time to have this kind of conversation with each other, it begins to develop a relational field of sorts that almost has its own energy. Sometimes it's thought of almost as its own consciousness that can kind of hold the relationship and almost has its own wisdom. Sometimes people will take the seat of the third, they say, and speak from the relationship instead of one of the.
Right.
I'm just curious about your thoughts about that in your own relationship and in the work you do.
Well, that's a penetrating question and comment. Let me first talk about what it does to someone's brain to use this kind of structured conversation with sentence stems. Basically, a neuroscientist would talk about it moving any sort of reactivity where the lower brain goes off, and there's fear, angst, anxiety. But before expressing that anxiety, first mirroring the person and saying, let me see if I've got that. I heard you say da da da. Is there more about that? That forces you into your executive function, the prefrontal cortex, which then integrates the whole brain, especially comments about curiosity and wonder. That's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex that when you don't even, where you admit you don't know, or your partner said something and instead of being anxious, you get curious about them and wonder why they think that and why they said it. All of that creates a relationship with the different parts of your brain that neuroscientists say promotes brain health, neural integration.
What you're talking about from neurobiological levels kind of references some of Dan Siegel's work and others around interpersonal neurobiology. But there is a resonance. I mean, you all use terms like mirroring, and of course we know about mirror neurons today. And there is that resonance that develops.
Right. Yeah, I think that we would agree with that. That for us the space between is our label on that relational space takes a life of its own in such a way that we become ultimately derivatives as persons of the space between. It creates us so that, and that we are relational beings, we are social beings, and when that relational space is paid attention to rather than the internal or individualistic space, that space takes a life of its own. And we think that takes a life of its own and starts transforming us because it mirrors reality. When I first heard it, I was a Freudian, no, that's no space between. There's just this intrapsychic world that you have to go into and explore. And if you do it long enough, you'll get well, and then you'll have a good relationship. And all that was, we know, inaccurate. That you can do all the analysis you want, but you still have to talk to another person in such a way that you don't devalue them, that you don't produce a polarization. And hardly any therapy teaches conversation. We use words to understand ourselves, but don't really teach people how to use words to connect and not polarize. And so that's the safe conversation. That's the piece of that. And when you do, you're right. When you practice that, and we have two things, just the structure, without judgment, we call that zero negativity, and that's a whole process itself. And with affirmations, that's a whole process itself. But when you talk without judgment, but fill it with the affirmation, you then will connect. And then you'll experience being. And then you'll feel fully alive and joyful. And then you'll say, hey, this is normal. This is what life is. And when I'm not feeling this, something's wrong. And that's then we go and treat it as a disease.
But I think you all are exploring something we actually haven't gotten to yet.
Started off really defining spirituality in sense of connectedness and being connected in that flow of being. And so, this is just wonderful. And moving this into the collective, the kind of things that are the values that come so clearly through your work, it's really about how do we talk to each other and how do we listen to each other and what could be more important in this world today, either at the couple level or the greater.
Or everybody,
everyone.
Right.
So this is wonderful. Well, we're a little bit out of time here, unfortunately, and but I'm wondering if there's some, maybe one or two simple principles that you'd like to leave our audience with that they could really remember and think about a simple principle or a simple practice that might, point them in the direction of this relational work that you all have modeled so beautifully.
So you have one?
Daily structure. One thing we've done is alternate which day what we were in charge. Like one of us make sure we're on duty. 2, by the time we go to bed, make sure we're connected in a wonderful way. And the next day, the other's on duty, and or daily practice. So every night before going to bed, we take a 0 negativity check and see if either of us has experienced negativity from the other. And if not, we do a quick, and if we have, we do a quick repair. But it doesn't happen in a workshop or one time. It is neurological, and you can change your brain, but it takes daily practice. But it's joyful.
Yeah.
It's so joyful to get to do.
And we have said practice is great, but you have to practice the right thing. It's like you can practice playing tennis, but if you don't practice getting that muscle, in that uncomfortable position, you're not going to hit the ball any better, no matter how often you swing the racket. So you have to practice the right thing. And so what we think we've discovered is structure paradoxically creates freedom. So that's why we say practice the structured conversation. And starting off with, is now a good time to talk? You should always make an appointment before you talk to somebody. Are they available? Would they be willing to be available? That would be itself a new practice. But fundamentally, it's the structured conversation, as Helen said, 0 negativity, at which she said, and because you can't connect if you're negative. It just doesn't happen. So 0 negative structure, 0 negativity, and then pump up the affirmations, because that's where the life flow happens.
You can't connect if your partner thinks you're negative. You may not even realize you're negative, but your partner, like for me, I loved helping Harville be his best self. I thought I was God's gift to Harville for all the improvements I saw he could make. And if I didn't tell him, who was going to tell him? So I was always telling him how he could self-improve. That was negative. So I had to learn.
Yeah, that's having a picture of me that I don't agree with. Anyway, so that's basically it. Practice, 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 practice. But we think the biggest practice is to get negativity out of your life. Whatever discipline you use, that has to go to 0, because only in a 0 negativity space can the energies connect. Negativity ruptures connecting. And so any tradition that allows you to move, and we mean negativity in the interactive space. You can keep it in your mind if you want to. That'll interfere some with connecting. But if you do it in the interactive space, it will rupture the oscillation between the two. And so that has to go. And so blow up the positive with affirmations and create a structure so that you talk in a particular way that doesn't polarize.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're referencing the negativity, so especially in the sphere of relationships, judgment and criticism are probably 2 of the primary culprits, right?
Well, we push it a little more generically than that. Anything your partner experiences as a put down.
Yeah, it's what your partner says is negative. But it's
like
probably,
an eye roll or what?
But you probably got it.
When are you gonna take the dog out?
Right.
It's like anything that says you're not doing stuff right. Mm-hmm. And so I'll put you down, devalue you.
We have a saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Right. Yeah. Not what you say, but how you say it. Good.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you both so much. I really want to remind our audience, relationships, is it relationship? The relationships plural first.org, right?
Yes.
And I can find out about this Safe Conversations model here. And as well as, going online and checking out all the amazing books that you all have written, especially some of your really well-known ones about getting the love you want, keeping the love you find, very key to, especially when we're talking about couples relationships and so forth. So this has been delightful and been such a pleasure being with you both. And I know this has stimulated a lot for me, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to follow your work, especially as you're moving this dialogue, safe conversation more into the larger sphere with what you're calling communal log, right? Communal log. And so I look forward to learning more about that.
Thank you. And we look forward to learning more about you and to being with Shamala.
Thank you so much.